Okay, well, welcome everybody. Talk number, where are we? Number 3, 10-minute monologues. It is a monologue. It would be nice to get sort of reaction as I go along, but I just have to keep going and hope I vaguely get it right. But as you can hopefully see, I don't normally dress like this. So this morning's talk is about smocks. I've spent most of my 32 years here trying to avoid wearing smocks. The last time I wore this one was for the Millennium Carnival, so 20 years ago. So I've done quite well. One of the reasons I don't wear this very often is that it smells horrendously musty. So my whole living room is going to smell of those for the rest of the day. But this is one of the major drawbacks of keeping these boxed away. We have in our collection 9 smocks. 7 of them are on permanent display. This one, as I say, is boxed up. It's a garment that goes back in one form or another for hundreds of years. But in this particular form, and this is a fairly typical Sussex one, these go back to the 18th century. You won't find any 18th century ones around these days because they were quite literally worn to destruction. So most of the ones that survive today are late 19th century, which is what this one would be. I'd say it's a fairly typical Sussex smock. It is fine linen, which is reasonably waterproof. If you've got a double collar like the one on this side, they're even more waterproof. And that one was probably coated with linseed oil, which would have made it quite uncomfortable to wear, but it would have kept the weather out. This one in green is a fairly typical Sussex colour. You'll find this colour all over the country. This one is quite basic, and it is a smock frock. It is quite correct to call a smock a frock. Mustn't call them a dress, but a frock is perfectly correct. This is a plain one. These two on either side, these are round frocks. They're exactly the same front and back. So you can put them on either way round. This evens out the wear, and it also makes getting dressed in the morning in the dark much easier. And anybody who is likely to be wearing these would spend most of their days getting up in the dark. So if you can just drop it over your head, either way around, it doesn't matter. They were extremely practical garments. They're loose fitting, though even this one, which is one of the few smocks I can get on, is quite tight around the shoulders. They have deep arms, so they're easy to move around in. There's a lot of material in them, so they're easy to work in. They're easy to cut as well, because all of these are square or rectangular panels. There's no shape in the cutting. All shaping is done by the smocking itself. So the sleeves are just tubes, basically, and you get the smocking panels at the top of the sleeves and at the cuffs and around the neck, and in the case of this one and this one, around the chest as well. And that's what gives it the shape. There are numerous stitches involved, but they're mostly stem stitch or cable stitch. But this one, you can see that's trellis stitch, or it's a variation on trellis stitch. I'm afraid I'm no expert on stitching, but trellis stitch, and you get honeycomb stitch and numerous others. There's a lot of skill in putting them together, but I'm saying cutting them, that was very easy. And they were, up to a point, mass produced. Certainly by the 19th century, they will be cut and sent out to people, often ready marked. They would put printing on the inside to show you where the stitching should go. So all we had to do was follow the dots, quite literally. So by the end of the 19th century, these were dying out, but so most of the ones that survive today will date from that period. So this one is really a working man's smock. These were all worn by men, all working men, mostly farm labourers, but shopkeepers, merchants would wear them as well. And so they were worn and worn until they fell apart. Something like this, which is the Sunday smock, that will be kept. And these ones are far more likely to survive today because they were looked after. This one would have been worn to church on a Sunday morning. Someone may even have been married in this one. And they were often worked by the bride, and she put a lot of effort in for her husband to be. The decoration on this one, which you really can't see at the moment, is excellent. So a lot of effort went into that. And of course, it is exactly the same front and back, so she had to do it all twice. But there will be people around the village who would specialize in doing this. They would spend their days producing working smocks for the local men. And these were, I say, good, practical, comfortable clothes until machinery started to turn up. If you're working with a sickle or scythe, these loose clothes are fine. If you start working with a reaper and binder, then these loose clothes are lethal. And too many men were killed wearing these smocks because they got caught in the machinery. One of the reasons why they died out. The other reason was because they created this yokel character. They made the men look like countrymen. And by the end of the 19th century, they were trying to avoid that. What took over were cheap suits. We have a copy of Gertrude Jekyll's Old West Surrey, which was written in 1904. And she's bemoaning the fact that men were giving up these smocks and wearing cheap suits from mass-produced tailors, which didn't last. They would buy them as Sunday suits. They'd wear them for a couple of years as their Sunday best, and then they would go out and work in the fields in them. And they weren't practical. They didn't last. They didn't keep them warm. They didn't keep them dry. And she was bemoaning the fact that things weren't like they used to be back in 1904, which is quite nice to know. The jokes that were told about these still being told today. At least certainly they were back in the 1980s. If you find old copies of the Two Ronnies on some of these strange television channels around, you'll see they're dressed up in these smocks, playing these old characters, straw hat on the head, chewing a straw, string tied around their trousers. This is the yokel character that was around for well over 100 years. And it's one of the reasons these died off. The last time I wore this at the Millennium Carnival, Clem Watson, who was the chairman of the Friends at the time, and I, we pushed a wheelbarrow with a very squeaky wheel, full of plants from the garden, up from the brickworks, up to the Hook Lane Recreation Ground. And this is what it was reduced to, wearing these things as costumes. And they make people laugh. It's fancy dress. And it was good fun doing that. The problem was that when they got to the hills, the cars couldn't go at walking pace. The lorries had to accelerate, which meant that Clem and I basically had to run to keep up with them. So that is what these smocks, poor old things, were reduced to. They were making people laugh. I wrote this wonderful picture here. This is done by George Garland, who was a Sussex photographer. And in the 1920s, he started taking pictures of Sussex life, rural life, which was disappearing at the time. This is, I'm trying to get the light on it. This is a character called William Shepherd, who was known as Old Shep. And he was George Garland's favorite model. It's a strange thing, but he was a countryman all his life and ended up as a male model. He was photographed in all sorts of different guises, including as a shepherd. But if George Garland wanted someone hedging, he'd do hedging, he'd do ditching, he'd do anything that needed doing just for the photograph. The unfortunate thing about this, the sad thing about this in a way, is that this is not Old Shep's smock. The smock and the hat belonged to George Garland. So even in the late 1920s, these were props. Old Shep did not have his own smock, even at that date. But at that time, you find some old men still wearing them. They were proud of them, particularly the Sunday smocks. And they did wear them for a few years, but certainly by the Second World War, they pretty well died out completely. So we're lucky to have this collection. So we have 9 of them in all, 2 boys' smocks. One of the boys' smocks was worn by Dr. Picton, who used to live in the vineyard over the road here. He wore that one when he was a boy, but they're more normally worn by men. There was a brief resurgence in the interest of smocking, of course, in the 1960s. It became very fashionable at that point. But at that point, worn by women. So these fashions do change. But as I say, I've been trying to avoid wearing these for a while. They are difficult for me to get on. There is no way that I can wear either of these. They're too tight. This one, I can't even get close to putting on. These were very small men, although he must have been quite tall, because this one does come down to the knees, which is where they're supposed to fall to. And so this one is the typical Sussex colour. You do find colour variations all over the country. We have a black one, which is quite rare, and you generally only find black ones in Sussex. But if you lived in Hertfordshire, you might be wearing a blue one. You live in other parts of the country, you might be wearing a brown one. But these white ones or off-white ones turn up pretty well everywhere. And they're wonderful things. And if we're famous for anything, as I said last week, we're famous for our textiles, for our embroideries, the samplers, and the smocks. And these have been on display for a long time, because I can remember seeing them when I was a child coming into the museum. And they used to scare the living daylights out of me on mannequins up in the end room upstairs. And they still do scare people. I have them at the bottom of the stairs now. These two have been moved from the bottom of the stairs. And when people turn the corner, it can catch them out, I think. They do think someone's standing there looking at them. The ghosts of old farm labourers. So thank you very much. We're a brief one today. There is a limit to my knowledge on smocks, I must admit. Next time, in a couple of weeks, I am going to do why the priest house, in inverted commas. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you.
Sophie. I will ask the questions. I've got time. We've got time. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Anthony.
Sophie.
I have one question, without wanting to reduce this to the level of a Two Ronnies sketch or bring up a lot of Scotsman's jokes.
Yes.
You've got a scarf around your neck, so the smock was presumably overgarment. Did they wear trousers underneath, or were they bare legs when they were working?
They would be wearing trousers, yes. Corduroy trousers.
Yeah, actually, nothing underneath.
Corduroy goes back hundreds of years. So corduroy trousers normally, though it's surprising how early denim turned up in this country. Denim turned up in America in quite early 1800s. So denim came over. So overalls like that would have taken over, but corduroy trousers, and they did have string around the legs, under the knee. This may be aping the earlier sort of gaiters that they used to wear. I think the myth is that it's to stop mice running up their trouser legs while they're harvesting in the field. But whether this is actually true or not, I have no idea. I have not conducted any practical tests on this. But they would probably have a linen shirt underneath as well. The scarf, old Chet is wearing a tartan scarf, so that's why I'm wearing this. But they would have these big red, white spotted handkerchiefs, and they'd wear those around their necks. These spotted handkerchiefs were multi-purpose items because they were also used to carry luggage. I know you see all these pictures, cartoons of people with the stick and the bundle of a handkerchief. But this is how they used to carry their food. They would bundle it up in the handkerchief. And there's another thing that Gertrude Jekyll complained about, that people were stopping doing that. They weren't using these big handkerchiefs to carry their lunch. They were wrapping them up in newspaper. And then they were throwing the newspaper away. So the newspapers were just ending up in the hedgerows. So littering in the countryside is nothing new.
Thank you.
Gosh.
Has anybody else got any questions?
You're all laughing. This is what the smock does. This is why I spent so long trying to avoid them. This is about the 5th time I've worn one in 32 years. So I've done quite well avoiding them. But any suggestions that I wear it every day will not be well received. Sorry about that. Sorry about that.